What if the universe isn't just a collection of stars, planets, and particles? What if it's a living, breathing entity, a network of consciousness that is continuously evolving and shaping the reality we experience? Imagine this. The universe has a vast cosmic mind where every star, every particle, and every human being plays a role in the unfolding of existence. It's not just a theory. Quantum physics and profound philosophies suggest that consciousness could be embedded into the very fabric of the universe itself, making us all active co-creators of the reality we live in. This concept challenges everything we've ever known about the universe. We tend to think of the cosmos as a cold, mechanical system, a vast expanse of space and matter, operating according to the laws of physics and governed by impersonal forces. But what if this view is incomplete? What if the universe, instead of being a mere collection of objects, is a dynamic living system, an ever-evolving entity that is conscious and aware, interacting with everything within it? What if the very fabric of reality is woven together by a universal consciousness, a force that connects all things and shapes the world around us? To understand this, let's step away from traditional perspectives. Imagine the universe not as a vast, empty space filled with isolated objects, but as a vibrant, interconnected network. Every star that burns in the sky, every planet that orbits a sun, every atom that forms matter is not simply a passive participant in the cosmic drama. They are active elements of a living system, contributing to the evolution of existence itself. The universe is not a distant observer, passively watching the world unfold. It's an active participant, evolving and adapting, just like we do. The implications of this idea are profound. If consciousness is embedded within the universe, then we are not just passive observers in this grand story. We are co-creators. Our thoughts, actions, and intentions have the power to shape the reality around us. This aligns with the groundbreaking findings of quantum physics, which show that particles do not exist in a definite state until they are observed. Our very act of observation collapses the wave function, determining the state of the particle. This suggests that our consciousness doesn't just passively witness the unfolding of reality, it actively participates in shaping it. What if this same principle applies to the entire universe? What if we, as conscious beings, are not only experiencing reality, but also helping to create it through our thoughts, decisions, and interactions with the world around us? This idea isn't just philosophical. It's rooted in the science of quantum mechanics, which reveals that the universe is far more interconnected and dynamic than we ever imagined. At its core, quantum physics teaches us that everything in the universe is entangled, interconnected, and shaped by the observer. This opens up an exciting possibility. If consciousness is not limited to human minds, but is woven into the very structure of the cosmos, then each of us is an integral part of this larger, universal consciousness. We are all actively contributing to the ongoing creation of the reality we experience. The more we understand about the universe and its connection to consciousness, the more we realize that we are not isolated in this vast cosmos. We are an essential part of a larger living system, and our consciousness is not something separate from the universe. It is an integral force within it. By recognizing this, we can begin to see ourselves not just as passengers in this grand cosmic journey, but as active co-creators, shaping the path forward. This realization can change the way we approach life. It invites us to live with intention, knowing that our thoughts and actions are not just fleeting moments, but powerful forces that contribute to the ongoing creation of the universe. The universe is not simply a backdrop for our lives. It is a living entity, and we are active participants in its evolution. Every moment, every thought, every action we take is a part of the larger cosmic story, and together we are co-creating the reality we all share. Have you ever wondered if the universe operates like a brain? Imagine this. Just as neurons in the brain send electrical signals to create consciousness, what if every planet, every particle in space is part of a vast cosmic network, contributing to a greater universal consciousness? What if our existence shapes the reality we experience? Quantum mechanics introduces the fascinating idea that particles are interconnected, much like neurons firing in the brain. In this grand system, each connection matters. Every action, every interaction between particles has a ripple effect throughout the universe. It's as if the cosmos is constantly evolving, responding to the smallest of changes. But what does this mean for us? At the quantum level, particles are not isolated. They are in a constant state of interconnection. This is known as quantum entanglement, the phenomenon where particles that are separated by vast distances can influence one another instantaneously. The more we explore this concept, the more it seems as though the universe is not a collection of independent objects, but rather a unified whole. Each star, planet, and even every grain of dust plays its part in this cosmic dance. It's as if the universe is a vast, interconnected neural network, each component contributing to the larger consciousness that shapes the fabric of reality itself. But what if this extends beyond just the particles? Could our consciousness, our thoughts, and actions be part of this network? Could we, as individuals, influence the greater whole? The idea that our thoughts resonate across the universe is not as far-fetched as it might seem. Just as a single neuron firing can have a profound impact on the brain's overall function, could our individual actions ripple out and affect the fabric of the universe? The principle of non-locality in quantum mechanics suggests that everything is connected, that every event in the universe can influence the next. This opens up a profound possibility. Our awareness, our consciousness, might not just be confined to our minds, but could be part of the universal consciousness. As we dig deeper into this concept, we encounter the idea that reality itself is fluid, shaped not just by our perceptions, but by the connections that exist within this cosmic network. Every choice we make, every action we take, creates a ripple that spreads across the universe. It's as though we are part of something much larger than ourselves, contributing to a vast, interconnected web of existence. Each thought, each intention, reverberates out into the cosmos, shaping the very reality we experience. What if we are not just passive observers of the universe, but active participants in shaping its unfolding? The more we understand the connections between everything in the universe, the more it becomes clear that we are not alone in shaping reality. Each individual is like a neuron in the vast brain of the universe, sending out signals that influence the whole. In this way, we are all part of a greater consciousness, a collective awareness that shapes not just our immediate surroundings, but the very structure of reality itself. So, when we look up at the stars or down at the smallest particles, we are reminded of our place in the universe's grand design. The connections between us all are profound, and the reality we experience is not just a product of our senses, but a reflection of the vast, interconnected web of consciousness that binds the universe together. It's a reminder that we are not separate from the cosmos, we are part of it, shaping it with every thought, every action, and every connection we make. The universe, in its infinite complexity, is not just a machine. It is alive, conscious, and interconnected, with each of us playing our part in its unfolding story. Every interaction, no matter how small, impacts the reality we experience. Just like thoughts form in the brain, what if consciousness itself is in a constant state of evolution as information flows through the universe? Each thought, action, and event creates ripples weaving into the fabric of existence. How deeply connected are we to the cosmic system? In our daily lives, we often overlook the profound effect our actions and thoughts have on the world around us. But when we look closely, it's evident that everything, no matter how minute, contributes to shaping the reality we perceive. At the quantum level, even the tiniest particle can influence something far away, demonstrating the interconnectedness of all things. Just as neurons in our brains transmit signals to create consciousness, could it be that every thought we have, every action we take, creates ripples in the larger consciousness of the universe? The concept of interconnectedness isn't just a philosophical idea, it's supported by quantum physics. The theory of entanglement tells us that particles, no matter the distance between them, are connected and can affect each other instantly. This doesn't just apply to particles, it extends to everything in the universe. What if, just like these particles, every event in our lives, every decision we make, and every interaction we have sends out ripples through the cosmic web? These ripples don't just disappear, they become part of the fabric of reality itself. Every action we take, no matter how small, sends energy into the universe. If our thoughts can influence the brain, creating consciousness and shaping reality in our minds, could the same be true for the universe? Could our consciousness, through our thoughts and actions, be shaping the reality of the cosmos? The idea that we are not passive observers, but active participants in the creation of our reality opens up a whole new perspective. We are all connected, not just to each other, but to the very fabric of the universe. When we act or think, we're creating waves that ripple out into the cosmos, adding to the larger network of consciousness that defines the universe. Every gesture of kindness, every moment of frustration, every decision we make has an impact far beyond what we can see. These seemingly small actions form part of the larger structure of existence. The interconnectedness of everything means that even the smallest of changes can have profound effects. Our thoughts, actions, and events become part of a larger flow, a cosmic current that we are all part of. So the question becomes, how deeply connected are we to the universe's system? If every thought and action sends ripples through the cosmos, how can we tap into this power and make more conscious decisions? What if we understood that every moment, every choice, every thought matters, not just for our personal reality, but for the greater cosmic reality we are all a part of? The truth is that we are intricately connected to the universe in ways we may never fully understand. However, this interconnectedness means that we have the potential to shape reality, not just for ourselves, but for the entire cosmos. In this sense, we are not isolated beings wandering through a disconnected world. We are part of an ongoing flow of energy and information that shapes the very fabric of existence. Our every thought and action matters, weaving itself into the greater narrative of the universe. The interconnectedness we share with the cosmos is not just a scientific fact, but a profound, meaningful realization. We are all a part of a much larger, constantly evolving story. Have you ever had that moment of awakening? The sudden shift when you realize that everyone around you is living their own complex life just as real as yours? This moment, which I call the sound, wakes you up to the fact that while we all share the same world, each of us experiences it in our own unique way. Imagine walking down a crowded street and suddenly each person becomes a part of a larger story, their experiences as deep and intricate as your own. This realization is not just enlightening, it changes the way you see everything. It reminds us that we are all actors on the same stage. Each one of us has our own spotlight. This shift in perspective is profound because it goes beyond just recognizing that people around us have their own lives. It's a moment when you truly begin to understand that each person has a story, struggles, dreams, and moments of joy that are just as meaningful as yours. You may be walking through a busy street, yet each face you pass is not just another random person. Each one is the protagonist in their own complex narrative. Their lives are filled with experiences and emotions not so different from your own. And suddenly the idea that we're all living parallel lives, each with our own set of challenges, victories, and losses, becomes incredibly real. This awakening doesn't just offer a moment of clarity, it challenges the way we interact with others. It reminds us that empathy goes far beyond understanding someone else's words. It's about recognizing that behind every person, there's a full, rich life unfolding, just as complicated and meaningful as ours. When we realize this, we stop seeing people as mere background figures in our own story and begin to see them as co-stars in this grand play of life. The realization is humbling because it forces us to acknowledge that our life is just one among billions of others, all equally important, all equally significant. This understanding also shifts the way we view our own life. We begin to see our own struggles and triumphs not as isolated events, but as part of a larger narrative that connects us to the world around us. It reminds us that we are not alone in this vast, interconnected world. Everyone has their own story, and even in our darkest moments, we share this experience with others who are also walking their own path. In a way, this awakening gives us the ability to live more consciously. We become more aware of the lives of others and more compassionate towards them. We understand that every interaction we have is meaningful because it involves a person with their own story. This awareness can change the way we approach relationships, work, and life in general. We begin to see the world less as a series of random events and more as a beautiful, interconnected web where each person is a vital part of the whole. The sound of this awakening is subtle but powerful. It's the moment when we realize that the world is not just about us, it's about all of us. It's a reminder that while we each have our own path, we are also deeply interconnected with those around us. This understanding encourages us to live with more empathy, more kindness, and more appreciation for the complexity of every person's life. It's a humbling, life-changing realization that reminds us that while we all walk through this world together, our individual journeys are as unique and profound as the people we share it with. Mindfulness and meditation bring us closer to an understanding that our perception of reality is not unique. With every breath, we move closer to the realization that the boundaries between us and the universe might be thinner than we think. These practices help us see beyond the material world, allowing us to recognize the interconnected web of existence that binds everything together. Through mindfulness, we start to perceive life not just as isolated events or individual experiences, but as a complex, interconnected flow of energy and consciousness. In the stillness of meditation, we experience a shift in perspective that deepens our awareness of how connected we truly are to the world around us. By focusing on our breath and quieting the noise of our thoughts, we open ourselves to a deeper level of consciousness that transcends our individual experiences. We begin to see the world not as a series of separate entities, but as a vast network, where every part is intrinsically linked to every other part. This awareness extends beyond the physical world, inviting us to recognize the invisible threads of energy, emotion, and connection that unite all living things. This shift in awareness fosters a deeper sense of empathy. When we realize that our perception of reality is just one perspective among many, we can better appreciate the richness of others' experiences. Just as our lives are filled with complexities, struggles, and joys, so too are the lives of those around us. This realization encourages us to move beyond surface-level interactions and engage with others from a place of true understanding and compassion. We start to see others not just as individuals with their own separate stories, but as fellow travelers on a shared journey. Their experiences, too, are profound and meaningful, just like our own. In essence, mindfulness teaches us that the line between ourselves and the universe may not be as rigid as we once believed. We are not separate from the world around us, but an integral part of it. As we become more aware of this connection, we begin to feel a deeper sense of responsibility toward others and the world we inhabit. We understand that our actions, our thoughts, and our emotions are not isolated. They ripple out into the world and affect the larger network of existence. The practice of mindfulness invites us to step into this greater awareness, encouraging us to live with more intention, compassion, and presence. It teaches us that every breath is an opportunity to reconnect with the world around us and to cultivate a deeper understanding of the vastness and interconnectedness of life. As we continue on our personal journeys, we begin to see that we are not alone. We are part of something much greater, something that we are constantly contributing to and being shaped by. Through mindfulness and meditation, we learn that our perception of reality is just one layer of a much larger, more complex truth. The boundaries we once thought separated us from the world are thinner than we ever imagined. This realization opens the door to greater empathy, understanding, and connection, inviting us to live more fully in the moment and embrace the beauty of being part of an intricate, interconnected universe. Think about this. Every action, every thought, every person is part of the same cosmic system. Just like neurons are interconnected in the brain, everything in the universe might be linked in a vast conscious network. The concept of a cosmic brain challenges our traditional views of a mechanical universe. Every star, every planet, every galaxy contributes to a dynamic, conscious whole. When we consider the idea of the universe as a conscious entity, it invites us to rethink the very nature of reality. We tend to view the universe as a collection of isolated mechanical objects, planets revolving around stars, galaxies drifting through space, each existing independently of the other. But what if the reality is far more interconnected, far more alive than we realize? What if every particle, every individual life, every cosmic event plays a role in a larger conscious system akin to the way individual neurons contribute to the brain's collective intelligence. This idea flips the script on our conventional understanding of existence. Instead of seeing the universe as a vast, impersonal machine with separate parts, we begin to see it as a unified, living organism. Every movement of a planet, every flicker of a star, every shift in the fabric of space could be part of a greater consciousness that connects all things. This interconnectedness suggests that nothing in the universe is truly independent. Every action and every thought might ripple through the cosmic web, influencing everything around it. The concept of a cosmic brain also forces us to reconsider our place in the universe. If everything is interconnected in a conscious network, then we are not just isolated individuals floating through space. We are active participants in this larger cosmic system. Our thoughts, our actions, and even our very existence contribute to the greater consciousness of the universe. Just as each neuron in the brain sends signals that shape our thoughts, every person, every event, and every action in the universe may be influencing the whole, contributing to the unfolding story of existence. This idea brings us closer to the realization that our lives matter, not just in the context of our individual experiences, but in the larger cosmic sense. If the universe is a conscious entity, then every thought, every interaction, every decision we make is part of that larger consciousness. We are, in essence, not separate from the universe, but integral to it. This realization can be both humbling and empowering. It encourages us to take responsibility for our actions, to recognize the impact we have on the larger whole, and to approach life with a deeper sense of interconnectedness and purpose. In this view, every star, every galaxy, every human being is a vital part of a cosmic intelligence, a consciousness that is constantly evolving and expanding. The idea of a cosmic brain invites us to think about the universe not as a machine, but as a living, breathing entity, full of awareness and potential. And in this vast network, we are all contributors, shaping the fabric of existence with every thought, every action, and every breath. This understanding encourages a deeper appreciation for the complexity and beauty of the universe. It reminds us that we are not merely observers in a distant, impersonal cosmos, but active participants in an interconnected system that is conscious, alive, and constantly evolving. Each of us, in our own unique way, is contributing to the larger consciousness of the universe, and this understanding can inspire us to live with greater purpose, empathy, and awareness of the profound connections we share with everything around us. Quantum physics is the backbone of this theory, revealing that reality does not exist in isolation. Instead, particles and events are part of a much larger system. The behavior of particles is not fixed until they are observed, much like how our perception shapes the way we experience reality. But what if we could tap into this cosmic flow of information and consciously shape our reality? At the core of quantum mechanics is the idea of interconnectedness. Particles are not isolated entities, but rather part of a web of relationships that shape the structure of the universe. This interconnectedness means that everything is in constant flux, awaiting observation to determine its form. In a similar way, our consciousness interacts with the world around us, influencing our perception and shaping the reality we experience. The act of observing, whether it's a particle or an event in our life, plays a crucial role in determining what manifests in our world. This means that reality, much like quantum particles, is not a fixed, static entity, but something that is shaped by the observer. This opens up fascinating possibilities. If we understand that our consciousness plays a role in shaping our experience, could we then harness this understanding to consciously influence our reality? Quantum physics tells us that everything is connected and that the observer has an active role in shaping what is observed. What if we could consciously align our perception with the flow of cosmic energy and information, creating a reality that reflects our deepest desires and intentions? By focusing our awareness and aligning it with the universe's inherent interconnectedness, we might be able to consciously influence the fabric of our lives, much like how quantum particles behave when observed. The idea that we can consciously shape our reality aligns with ancient wisdom found in many spiritual traditions, which have long suggested that our thoughts, intentions, and consciousness are powerful forces that shape the world around us. Whether through prayer, meditation, or mindfulness, many teachings emphasize the importance of being mindful of our thoughts and intentions because they ripple out into the universe, influencing our experience. Quantum mechanics, with its focus on the observer's influence, provides a scientific framework that supports these ancient ideas. It tells us that reality is not simply a passive experience, it's a dynamic, participatory process that we are an active part of. If we could consciously harness this connection, imagine the potential we could unlock. Instead of passively experiencing life, we could become active participants in its creation. By learning to focus our awareness and align it with the greater flow of the universe, we could shape the reality around us in ways that reflect our true desires and highest potential. Quantum physics suggests that this possibility is not just theoretical. It may be a fundamental aspect of the way the universe operates. The more we learn about quantum mechanics and the role of the observer, the more we realize that we have the power to shape our reality in ways that we may have never fully understood before. Ultimately, quantum physics challenges us to rethink the nature of reality. It shows us that we are not passive observers of a fixed universe, but active participants in an interconnected system. By becoming aware of this, we have the potential to consciously shape our lives, aligning our perception with the flow of cosmic energy to create the reality we want to experience. In doing so, we tap into a deeper understanding of ourselves and the universe, unlocking the power to transform our world. Here's where things get even more fascinating. What if consciousness is not just a byproduct of the brain, but a fundamental aspect of reality itself? Imagine consciousness as a universal force that permeates everything. From trees to stones, every particle has some level of awareness. Could it be that we are all manifestations of a larger cosmic consciousness? This idea challenges our traditional understanding of consciousness as something solely tied to the human brain. Typically, we think of consciousness as the result of complex neural activity, confined to our minds and driven by the processes within our brain. But what if consciousness is not limited to humans or animals? What if it's a pervasive force that exists throughout the entire universe? This is an idea that has intrigued philosophers, scientists, and spiritual thinkers for centuries, that consciousness is not just a localized phenomenon, but something that is woven into the very fabric of existence. If consciousness is indeed a universal force, it would mean that everything in the universe is imbued with some form of awareness. It's not hard to imagine that even the smallest particles of matter, which we once considered lifeless, might possess a certain degree of consciousness. In this view, consciousness would not be confined to brains or minds. Rather, it would be an intrinsic part of the universe, present in all things, from the vast expanses of space to the smallest grains of sand. What does this mean for us? If we are all part of a larger cosmic consciousness, then we're not just isolated beings navigating through life. We are expressions of this greater universal awareness. Every one of us, every living creature, and every inanimate object is connected through this vast web of consciousness. Our thoughts, actions, and experiences are part of a larger cosmic narrative, one in which we are all intertwined. This interconnectedness implies that we are not alone in our experiences. Everything in the universe is sharing this experience with us, each in its own way. Thinking of consciousness as a universal force also opens up new possibilities for how we interact with the world. If everything has some level of awareness, then we begin to see the world differently. Instead of viewing nature and the universe as something separate from ourselves, we might begin to see it as a living, breathing entity, where everything is in relationship with everything else. The tree you pass by, the rock you walk over, even the air you breathe, each is part of a greater conscious whole. This perspective invites a profound sense of empathy. If we are all part of the same cosmic consciousness, then everything we do affects the whole. Our thoughts and actions are not isolated. They ripple out into the universe, influencing everything around us. This could inspire us to live more consciously, knowing that our actions have a deeper, more universal impact. We might begin to treat all things with more reverence, recognizing that they too are expressions of the same consciousness that exists within us. Ultimately, the idea that consciousness is a fundamental part of the universe offers us a new way of understanding our place in the cosmos. It suggests that we are not separate from the world around us, but integral to it. Our lives are expressions of a larger cosmic awareness, and everything in existence, from the tiniest atom to the largest galaxy, is connected through this shared consciousness. This understanding could transform the way we view ourselves, each other, and the universe. We are not merely observers of reality, we are participants in a vast, interconnected, and conscious universe. This leads us to John Wheeler's participatory universe theory, where the act of observation is not passive, but rather actively shapes reality. Just as we shape the world through our thoughts, actions, and attention, the universe itself is created through interaction. What if we are not just observers of the universe, but also active co-creators? Wheeler's theory challenges the traditional view that we merely observe a pre-existing reality. Instead, it suggests that our observation, and by extension, our participation, plays an integral role in the formation of that reality. In quantum mechanics, the observer effect demonstrates that particles do not exist in a definite state until they are observed. The very act of measurement or observation collapses the wave function, determining the particle's state. This isn't just about us watching a cosmic show. It implies that our involvement actively contributes to the unfolding of reality. When we consider the universe as something that is shaped by our participation, it shifts our understanding of our role in the cosmos. We're no longer passive beings experiencing life. We become active participants in the creation of the reality around us. This concept expands the idea of human agency, suggesting that our thoughts, emotions, and actions ripple out into the world, influencing not just our immediate surroundings, but the very fabric of the universe. In this view, reality is not a fixed, static thing waiting to be discovered. It's a dynamic process, continually shaped by the observer. This challenges our conventional thinking, urging us to consider that the universe itself is in a constant state of becoming, created by our interactions with it. Every time we make a decision, express an intention, or even hold a thought, we are influencing the universe's unfolding. Our attention, our focus, and our energy contribute to what materializes in our lives and in the world around us. What does this mean for us as individuals? It means that we have more power than we might have realized. If the universe is participatory, if it is actively shaped by our engagement with it, then we are not passive bystanders waiting for life to unfold. We are co-creators, actively molding our experiences and perhaps the very nature of reality itself. This gives us the potential to live with more intention and awareness, knowing that we are contributing to the world's creation in every moment. This also invites us to consider how we direct our attention. If reality is shaped by our observation, then the way we choose to focus our attention becomes even more significant. What we choose to think about, where we choose to put our energy, and how we engage with the world can have far-reaching consequences. If we actively participate in the creation of our reality, it becomes essential that we do so with mindfulness and purpose. In a participatory universe, we are not separate from the cosmos. We are deeply connected to it, and through our participation, we help shape it. Just as an artist creates a masterpiece by interacting with their medium, we too are artists, shaping the universe with every thought of action and decision. This shifts the way we see ourselves and our place in the world, encouraging us to take responsibility for our participation in the cosmic dance of existence. The universe isn't something that just happens to us, it's something we help create every single day. Thinkers like Albert Einstein and Carl Jung believed in this connected universe. Could consciousness be a universal force, a binding force that connects everything together? Einstein called it an illusion to believe that we are separate from the universe. Jung and others suggested that all of us are participants in a collective consciousness, interacting with and shaping the reality around us. Einstein's perspective on the universe challenges our common belief in separateness. For centuries, we have viewed ourselves as individual entities, isolated from the vastness of the cosmos. But Einstein saw this as an illusion, arguing that everything in the universe is interconnected. In his famous theory of relativity, he showed that the fabric of space and time is not a static, isolated backdrop, but a dynamic system that bends and shapes itself based on the mass and energy within it. This interconnectedness means that no part of the universe exists in isolation. Everything, every star, planet, particle, affects and is affected by everything else. Similarly, Carl Jung's ideas of the collective unconscious also point to a deeper level of connection. Jung believed that all human beings share a collective unconscious, a pool of shared memories, symbols, and experiences that shape our behaviors and perceptions. This suggests that we are all linked by a common, unseen thread. Jung didn't see consciousness as an isolated phenomenon within each individual, but as part of a larger, collective system. In this view, our individual consciousnesses are not entirely separate. They are influenced by and contribute to a broader, universal consciousness. If consciousness is indeed a universal force, then it would mean that we are not isolated observers in the universe, but active participants in its ongoing creation. Just as individual neurons in the brain form a collective consciousness, our individual experiences, thoughts, and actions may contribute to the larger cosmic consciousness. This idea transforms the way we think about our role in the universe. Instead of being passive recipients of external experiences, we are co-creators of the reality around us. Our thoughts and actions ripple out, influencing the collective consciousness and shaping the world we live in. This shift in perspective also invites us to consider the deeper implications of our interactions with one another. If we are all connected through a shared consciousness, then the way we treat others, the way we engage with the world becomes far more significant. Every interaction, every thought, and every action is a part of the larger cosmic dance. This interconnectedness encourages us to live with greater awareness and responsibility, knowing that we are contributing to the collective consciousness in ways that may extend far beyond what we can see. In this view, the universe is not just a collection of separate, unrelated objects, but a living, breathing system where every part is interconnected and contributes to the whole. Whether through the theory of relativity or the collective unconscious, the ideas of Einstein and Jung point to a deeper, more profound understanding of reality, one where consciousness is not something limited to individuals, but a universal force that binds everything together. It's a reminder that we are all part of something much larger than ourselves, a cosmic network of energy, consciousness, and existence. The reality we experience is shaped not only by us, but by our interactions with the collective consciousness of all beings and everything in the universe. Imagine this. If every thought, every interaction shapes the universe, then what role do we play? What if, as co-creators, we're not merely passive observers, but active participants in the creation of reality? Our thoughts, actions, and decisions are not just ripples on the surface. They are powerful forces that actively shape the world around us. The more we become aware of our connection to the universe, the more we realize that we are co-creating the very fabric of reality itself. This realization is both empowering and humbling. It means that we are not separate from the world around us. We are intricately woven into the web of existence, and our individual experiences contribute to the collective consciousness. Every interaction we have, whether it's a small, quiet moment or a significant life event, adds to the larger dynamic unfolding of the universe. Our energy, our focus, and our intentions are part of the greater creative process. When we acknowledge this, we begin to see the immense power we hold as individuals. We are not just living in the world, we are helping to shape it. We are not simply witnessing reality, we are active participants in its creation. And this power to shape our reality comes with a responsibility, one that calls us to consciously direct our energy toward creating a world that reflects our highest ideals, a world of compassion, understanding, and connection. As we become more aware of this interconnection, we can choose to harness this awareness for good. We can choose to create a reality that is built on empathy, love, and mutual respect. Every thought of kindness, every action of support, and every word of encouragement becomes part of the larger collective tapestry that we are all weaving together. By focusing on what unites us rather than what divides us, we can contribute to a world that is more harmonious and full of possibility. But this requires us to take action. We must actively participate in shaping the reality we want to experience. It's not enough to simply recognize our role in the universe. We must step into it with intention and purpose. Every decision we make, every interaction we have, and every moment of awareness we bring to our lives is an opportunity to contribute to a more compassionate, connected, and understanding world. We are not mere bystanders in this universe. We are co-creators of reality. Let's choose to use this power wisely. Let's direct our energy toward building a world that reflects the values we want to see: compassion, love, understanding, and unity. The universe is waiting for us to take action. Together, we have the power to shape a future that is brighter, more connected, and full of possibility. The time is now. Let's start creating it. Welcome to Awaken Wisdom, a place for those who are ready to step into their power as co-creators of their reality. Here, we explore the deep interconnectedness of all things, empowering you to awaken to your role in the universe and consciously shape your life. Whether it's through spiritual wisdom, personal growth strategies, or the exploration of consciousness and the cosmos, Awaken Wisdom is your guide to living a life filled with purpose, intention, and meaning. As we dive deep into the concepts of interconnectedness, quantum physics, and the power of the mind, this channel will inspire you to take control of your destiny and live as an active participant in the unfolding of the universe. Join us as we explore how every thought, every action, and every connection contributes to the greater whole, and learn how you can consciously co-create the life and world you desire. Subscribe to Awakened Wisdom and begin your journey today. This is more than just a channel, it's a movement. Together, we can awaken to the truth of our interconnectedness and start shaping a reality that reflects the highest potential of humanity. The universe is waiting for you to step into your power. Are you ready to awaken?